The desert stretched out like a canvas of fire and dust, the horizon shimmering in the heat of a fading sun. A lone Mustang moved across it, his steps slow but unyielding. His coat, once the color of midnight, was dulled by layers of sand and sweat. Each breath rasped from his chest like wind dragging over broken glass. His hooves were cracked, bleeding faintly with every step, but he kept walking. He had been walking for miles, 40 now, though he couldn't count them, only feel the ache deep in his bones. Clutched in his jaws, like a talisman he dared not drop, was a faded strip of red cloth. It fluttered weakly against his cracked lips when the wind picked up. The air smelled faintly of rain, though the clouds overhead carried more thunder than mercy. He remembered her, the way her hands had trembled the first time they touched him, not from fear, but from care. He'd been a foal then, no more than a bundle of knobby legs and wild eyes, caught in a barbed wire fence. The memory came in flashes. Her kneeling in the dirt, murmuring soft words, the warmth of her palms on his flank as she worked the wire free. She had stayed with him until he could stand, bandaging his cut, with a piece torn from her own bandana. That same bandana now hung in tatters from his teeth, the smell of her long gone, but the memory anchored in his chest. She had let him go, and he had run wild for years, until men came with ropes and iron and broke the world apart. He had tried to forget her. He couldn't. Not when the nights in the corral stretched endless under a strange sky. Not when the lash bit his skin for balking at a saddle. Not when the man's boot struck his ribs for refusing to bow. And so, one night under a moon thin as a blade, he had kicked down the rotting gate and bolted into the desert. He had carried only the memory of her and the bandana he had stolen long ago from her ranch fence, kept hidden under hay in the corner of the pen like a secret prayer. Each mile since then had peeled away another layer of him. The scars, the fear, the dust of captivity. What remained was a single thought. He had to find her. On the edge of a valley where wild sage grew thick and stubborn, Emily Sinclair crouched in the dirt with a cracked enamel mug of coffee in her hands. The evening wind carried the scent of rain and horses and loneliness. She stared at the empty corral behind her, its rails warped and leaning like the bones of some long-dead animal. Once it had held life. Colts bucking under the sun. Her father's laughter as he taught her how to braid manis. Her mother humming while carrying feed buckets. Now the ranch fell hollow. Emily drew her jacket tighter. The divorce papers lay folded in her pocket, heavy as a stone. The lawyer had called that morning. It's finalized. No one had asked if she felt finished. Since returning home 6 weeks ago, she had poured herself into repairing fences and nursing a sickly calf. Anything to keep her hands busy. But at night, in the silence of her childhood bedroom, the ache crept in. A soft voice pulled her from her thoughts. Coffee's gone cold again. She turned to see Joe leaning against the barn door. His weathered face bore a permanent squint, as if the sun had etched it there. He'd worked for her family since before she was born. Emily forced a faint smile. Happens when you sit too long staring at nothing. Not nothing. Joe tilted his head toward the horizon. You're waiting. For what? His shoulders lifted in an easy shrug. That's for you to know, or find out. In the distance, a faint rumble rolled across the desert. Emily glanced skyward. Storm's coming, she murmured. Joe's eyes stayed on her. Maybe, or maybe something else. The Mustang pressed onto the dark, legs trembling as thunder cracked above him. His ears flicked back at the sound, but he didn't falter. Each step brought him closer to something he couldn't name, but felt as sure as the earth beneath his battered hooves. And though he didn't know it, she was waiting too. The desert at night was alive with sound, the whisper wind through dry grass, the distant howl of a coyote, the scrape of a hoof against stone. The Mustang moved like a shadow across the pale earth, his head low, nostrils flaring to catch every scent. His breath steamed faintly in the cold air. Each step jarred his tender legs, but he refused to stop. The cloth in his mouth was wet now, ragged from his teeth. Still, he held it like a promise. A memory drifted into him unbidden. He was younger then, his coat sleek and his spirit unbroken. The day he'd first seen her, Emily had been sitting cross-legged in a field, sketchbook in hand. She hadn't noticed him at first, but when she did, she froze, not out of fear, but wonder. Instead of shouting or chasing him off like the others, she had only whispered, "Beautiful boy." He had taken a cautious step toward her, the scent of her hair, wildflowers, and dust. Stayed with him long after he bolted back into the hills. He had understood why he returned the next day, or the day after, but now, in the emptiness of the desert, he understood everything. Miles away, Emily's dreams were restless. She was 13 again, holding her breath as she approached a trembling foal caught in a wire fence. Its eyes had been wide with terror, legs flailing. Blood streaked its dark coat, where the barbs had bitten deep. "Easy now," she had murmured, her own heart hammering. "I'm not going to hurt you." It had taken hours to free him. Even after the last wire fell away, she stayed, stroking his muzzle until his breaths came softer. In her dream, she saw him limp away into the hills, his dark eyes meeting hers one last time before he vanished into the mist. When she woke, her pillow was damp. By dawn, the Mustang had reached the canyon. The rocks rose around him in jagged teeth, their edges cutting into the orange light of morning. A narrow trail snaked downward, treacherous with loose stone. He placed a hoof carefully. A rock gave way. His leg twisted sharply as his weight fell, and pain shot through him like fire. He crumpled to his knees, the cloth dropping from his jaws. For a moment, the world tilted, soundless, airless. He lay still. The wind lifted the strip of fabric, carrying it a few feet before it caught on a bush. The Mustang's ears twitched, his eyes fixed on the bandana. With a groan, he pulled himself upright, his injured leg shaking violently. He limped forward, biting down on the cloth once more. Even broken, he would not let go. At the ranch, Emily stood in the barn doorway, staring at the horizon. "You keep looking west," Joe said behind her, wiping his hands on a rag. "What's out there?" "I don't know," she admitted, "but I feel like something's coming." Joe's lips curved faintly, though his eyes stayed sharp. Funny thing about animals, the ones that matter, they find their way back, even across deserts, even after years. Emily frowned. "You talk like you know." "I've seen it." Joe nodded at the corral. "When you fixed that fence, you weren't just mending wood. You're waiting for someone, whether you know it or not." That night, a storm gathered on the horizon. Lightning flashed in jagged streaks, illuminating the Mustang's path as he limped through the scrubland. Every muscle screamed at him to stop, but in his chest, something stronger than pain drove him on. He could almost hear her voice in the wind. The sky broke open just as Emily tightened the cinch on her saddle. Rain lashed the earth in sharp, stinging needles. Thunder rolled in waves across the hills, each rumble shaking the air around her. She should have stayed inside. Joe had warned her the storm would be bad. But there was no silencing the pull in her chest, that gnawing sense that something was out there, fighting its way toward her. She swung onto her horse, fingers numb against the reins, and whispered, "Please, let me be right." The Mustang stumbled again, his breath ragged, his leg nearly giving out beneath him. The storm was merciless now, sheets of water blinding his vision, mud sucking at his hooves. The bandana hung sodden from his teeth. Every instinct screamed at him to find shelter, to stop before his body gave out entirely. But the image of her face, gentle, determined, full of quiet strength, burned like fire in his mind. Step by step, he pressed on. Lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the ranch house in the distance. Emily's heart lurched. For weeks she stared out at the same horizon, willing someone to appear. Now, as she urged her horse faster through mud, she felt it in her bones. She wasn't searching blindly anymore. When she saw him, she almost didn't recognize him. At the edge of her property, a dark shape stumbled through the rain. He was thin, so thin, his ribs sharp beneath matted fur. His mane hung in tangled ropes, and his coat bore raw patches where skin showed through. But his eyes, they were the same. Emily slid from her horse before it had even stopped, boots splashing into the muck. "No," her voice cracked. "It can't be." The Mustang lifted his head weakly, his body trembling with exhaustion. In his jaws, the tattered bandana slipped free, and dropped into the mud. Her breath caught. Shadow. The name, one she had whispered only in dreams, seemed to pull him forward. His legs shook violently, threatening to fold, but he stumbled another step. Emily ran to him, tears blurring her vision as she cupped his rain-slicked face in her hands. "Oh, my God! It's you." He sagged into her touch, a low wicker rumbling in his throat. His body quaked. Too spent to even hold himself upright. "You came back," she whispered. Her tears mixed with the rain as she stroked his mane, fingers catching in the knots. "You remembered." Shadow's breathing was shallow, but his eyes stayed locked on hers. "I've got you now," she promised, voice fierce despite the sobs breaking through. "You're safe. You're home." Joe watched from the barn, his hat pulled low against the rain. A faint smile tugged at his lips. "Damn fool horse," he murmured, "and damn fool girl. Both of you needed this." The storm raged on, but Emily didn't move. She stayed in the mud with Shadow's head resting in her lap, whispering to him over and over as if her voice alone could stitch him back together. "You held on all this way," she said softly, fingers brushing the filthy strip of bandana. "And now I'm holding on to you." The storm passed in the night, leaving behind a world scrubbed clean. The desert air smelled of wet earth and sage as dawn spilled across the horizon in muted golds and pinks. Emily sat curled on a blanket in the barn, her back pressed to a wooden post, her eyes heavy but unclosing. She had refused to leave Shadow's side. His body rose and fell in slow, steady breaths as he lay on a thick bed of straw. The soft sound of his breathing was all the proof she needed. He was still here. Through the long hours of the night, she had cleaned his wounds with warm water and gentle hands. Each brushstroke down his muddy coat seemed to calm them both. For every hitch in his breath, she whispered memory. "Remember when you used to sneak into my mama's vegetable garden?" She was furious. "I wasn't. I'd leave the gate cracked just so you'd get in." Shadow flicked an ear faintly. His dark, "I watching her even as sleep," tugged at him. "You always came back," she murmured. Even then. By mid-morning, he tried to rise. His legs shook, but Emily was there instantly, pressing her palm to his chest. "Not yet," she said softly. "You're safe now. You don't have to fight anymore." Shadow let out a long, rattling sigh and folded back down, resting his head in her lap, as if he'd done it 1,000 times before. Joe leaned against the barn doorframe, arms crossed. "He's got grit," he said quietly. Emily didn't look up. He shouldn't have made it. 40 miles in that shape. He made it because he wanted to. Joe's voice was gentle, but it carried weight. "Animals don't come back for just anything, Emily. He came back for you." Emily swallowed hard, her hand drifting to the shredded bandana lying beside her. "He held on to this the whole way," she whispered. "It's like he never forgot." Joe stepped forward, crouching near them. "Maybe he didn't. Maybe neither of you did." Over the next week, Emily nursed Shadow with a patience born from love. She cleaned his cuts, tended his cracked hooves, and fed him small, careful meals until the hollows in his sides began to fill out. At night, she sat in the straw with him, her back against the stall wall, speaking softly into the darkness. "You came back to me when I didn't even know I needed you," she said one evening, her fingers tracing his long muzzle. "You carried the only thing that still tied you to this place. And her voice caught. I wasn't holding on to anything." Shadow shifted closer, his warm breath ghosting over her face. Emily closed her eyes. "But maybe now we can both start over." 2 weeks later, as the sun began to set in a blaze of orange and gold, Emily opened the pasture gate. Shadow stood beside her, coat sleek now, eyes alert. "Ready?" she asked softly. For a moment, he stayed still, tail flicking lazily. Then, with a toss of his head, he stepped forward into the open field. Emily's breath caught as she watched him break into a trot, then a canter, then a full gallop. His muscles rippled under his shining coat, his mane streaming like a banner behind him. At the edge of the field, he slowed and turned. Their eyes met across the distance. Emily smiled, tears pricking her lashes. "You're free, Shadow." But the Mustang didn't run on. Instead, He trotted back toward her, stopping just close enough for her fingers to brush his warm shoulder. Joe watched from the porch, shaking his head with a small, knowing smile. "He's not going anywhere," he called out. "He's home." Emily pressed her forehead to Shadow's neck, breathing in the warm, familiar scent of him. "Yes," she whispered. "So am I." The camera would pull back here, if this were a film. The ranch bathed in golden light. Emily and Shadow stand together in the field, their silhouettes soft against the horizon. The wind ruffled his mane. Her hand rested lightly on his shoulder. And for the first time in a long time, they were both whole.